sand, sun, and success. It's the rhythm we feel.
Perspective of looking at foreign labor coming into the Virgin Islands. I hear no ooh, no ah, because we hear the workforce. We're trying to make sure that most people get employed locally, but we want to make sure that there are options, because you've heard us talk about, Governor Bryant, for some time, quoting the RAND study, that we're going to need 5 to 7 more thousand individuals to help us with recovery projects. And so what we want to be able to do is to make sure that we're exposed, or we have an option if we do need outside foreign labor, that the opportunity is here. And so this afternoon, my panel is here to help discuss that. We have Administrator Brian Pasternak from the U.S. Department of Labor. Could you introduce yourself briefly, Mr. Pasternak?
Good morning, Commissioner. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you. There's a little bit of feedback that when I'm talking, so just keep going. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to participate, albeit virtually, on this distinguished panel. Brian Pasternak, I'm the administrator for the Office of Foreign Labor Certification. I work in the U.S. Department of Labor in Washington, D.C.
With me here next to me, we have
Adrienne Williams-Octalien. I'm the director for the Office of Disaster Recovery, charged with almost about $20 billion of funding coming into the territory to transform and make the Virgin Islands more resilient. So happy to be a part of this panel.
And to her left?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, St. Croix. I am Nicole Jacobs. I am the Director of Human Resources at the Virgin Islands Department of Education, one of the best government agencies around. I have to put that in. So we are tasked with recruiting high quality personnel.
Thank you. And my colleague?
Good afternoon, Dr. Dionne Hedrington, excuse my voice, Commissioner for the Virgin Islands Department of Education. And I'm happy to be here because we do a lot of foreign employment to fill a lot of the vacancies that we have. And so I'm happy to be here to join in the discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Geraldine. I'm the Director of Workforce Development Services at the Virgin Islands Department of Labor. Ms. Jacobs said that the Department of Education is the best, but the Department of Labor is the most productive department in the Virgin. Good afternoon.
Well said. Good afternoon.
Well, I'm afraid I can't join in that competition, so I'll have to go solo here. Geraldine Pitt, CEO of VIYA, the #1 telecommunications provider in the Virgin Islands. The biggest employment, and so we serve the community and have been doing so through various iterations for the last since 1950 somebody. So I'm proud to be here to represent the team, but also to participate in what could be a very exciting discussion, because I am a foreign, to some extent, Grenadian, St. Lucian, everywhere.
Thank you, thank you. So let's get right into it. Let's start talking about the employment in the Virgin Islands and the projects that's coming on board, because why do you think that we might need foreign labor? And then let's start there.
Well, I think you can be the first person to punctuate why we need foreign labor, because right now unemployment has been the lowest that has ever been here in the territory. You know what that means? That means that everyone who really wants a job has a job, or their demand occupations, again, that's still necessary for these projects. Financial people, construction, with the construction of 43 educational facilities. Every single healthcare facility will be reconstructed. You know we need more people.
So with that, Mr. Pasternak at U.S. Department of Labor, could you give us a little brief understanding of what the foreign labor certification entails, and then we can start talking about how it's evolved and how Department of Education utilizes it and how it can be utilized in VIYA.
Sure can. Happy to get started. within the U.S. immigration system, there are a wide array of visa classifications permitting U.S. employers to sponsor foreign nationals to work on a temporary or permanent basis. Out of historical policy concerns regarding the availability of workers, on the wages and working conditions of domestic workers, Congress requires that employers first obtain a labor certification, is what it's called, from the Secretary of Labor in several of these work visas before a worker can be admitted into the country. And in many cases, Congress puts limits or caps on the total number of foreign workers that can be admitted in a given year, sometimes from which countries around the world. So our office engages directly with U.S. businesses and their representatives who anticipate a shortage of domestic workers to help them obtain this thing called a foreign labor certification. With that context, the H-1B and the H-2B temporary work visas are particularly possibly useful here. They serve and help different business needs. And each visa program has distinctly different timeframes for applying and statutory and regulatory requirements. So we'll kind of start with H-1B. Generally, it's a visa program for jobs requiring a bachelor's degree or higher or equivalent experience. There is a visa cap of 65,000 for new workers, and there's another 20,000 visas for workers with advanced degrees, master's degrees or higher. There's another 6,800 visas specifically for Chile and Singapore, but those were born out of trade agreements with the U.S. Employers can hire one or more foreign workers in the H-1B program for 3 consecutive years with 1 3-year extension. There's also provisions in the law that allow H-1B workers to have 1-year renewals for kind of an unlimited amount of time, provided that the employer is also sponsoring them for permanent green card employment. So the process there is about, applying 6 months in advance. The one unique thing about H-1B to keep in mind is that there actually isn't a statutory requirement for businesses to search for qualified U.S. workers. That's actually not known to a lot of people. It's unique. It's a visa classification where employers just simply attest that there's no strike or lockout at the place of employment. They're going to provide fair working conditions like work hours, shifts, vacations, benefits, offer at least prevailing wages, and provide notice of filing for 10 days. So our office is required by law to process H-1B applications in 7 business days of receipt, and there's really no restrictions on where you can get foreign workers from. So this program has a distinct advantage of being relatively simple and fast, but employers do face real challenges accessing it due to limited visa caps. Just mentioned about how popular these foreign labor programs have become. They really have been. We are seeing record level use of these programs across the United States. And in H-1B, it's really problematic because you're basically subject to a lottery by the Department of Homeland Security. So that's the biggest limitation of that one. H-2B, and then I'll turn it back over to you, is a visa program used for skilled jobs that do not require a formal education. And there are multiple visa caps in this program. Congress imposes a 66,000 visa cap, but the Homeland Security Secretary has authority to supplement that cap by an additional 64,716 workers. This has been done in each of the last 6 or 7 years, and it does include specific set-asides. So there are 20,000 visas set aside for workers from countries like Haiti, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Costa Rica, Ecuador, and Colombia for workers for businesses who might need them from a specific country. Same as H-1B, you can hire multiple workers on a single H-2B application. Generally, the period lasts 10 months or less, but there is a special one-time occurrence standard that can permit businesses to employ H-2B workers for up to 3 consecutive years, which might be a viable option here for disaster recovery and reconstruction projects. There's a really strong relationship in H-2B with the Virgin Islands Department of Labor, which helps the employer advertise the job and locate qualified workers. And one key feature to understand about H-2B versus H-1B is that the Department of Homeland Security and State actually publish what's called an eligible countries list every year that contain countries where only those foreign nationals can obtain an H-2B visa. So although this changes from year to year, in the Caribbean region, for example, those currently only include the countries of St. Lucia, Barbados, Jamaica, Grenada, Haiti, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the Dominican Republic. So we're not really involved in that process at the Labor Department, but it is something businesses need to understand when they want to try to access these programs. I'll turn it back over to you.
The list does not include several of our Caribbean neighbors. So if you're looking at the H-2B, you're subject to that listing. Brian?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk business. VIYA, how do you see yourself within the scope of what you're doing within telecommunications in the territory? What would be your need or your take on what just transpired?
Well, I'll start with VIYA, but I'd like to go a little bit into just general development in the Virgin Islands as it relates. VIYA is just a small sector, really, of where the need lies. But in terms of VIYA, I think for us is the technical skill set that you need, especially in emerging technologies, whether it's 5G, whether it's climbing the towers, whether it's the IT sector, that's a scarce resource. Funny enough, a big one is sales. People don't like to sell. People like to work but not sell, right? That's two different skill sets. And a lot of business requires selling aptitude, aptitude, all of that to elevate their business as well. So sometimes it's really about skilled workers, but also it's sometimes about unskilled workers. When I listened to the presentation a short while ago, it seemed to me that the one-on-one approach to this is never going to take us to a place fast enough, right? I almost think that we need to think about this the way the cruise lines think about it. They go to a country, they do this mass interviews, and then people come out to them and, a whole fair. But we need to take it to those countries that we know is already eligible. Because most people won't just get up and do it. They always think, if you had an experience, I'm Grenadian and by extension St. Lucian as well, just going to the visa office to get something is enough fare that nobody goes. Or only the desperate goes, or the really highly skilled goes, because you just think your chance of success is so minimal. I don't think they see beyond the cane cutting in Canada or the sharecropping in Toronto or anywhere else. So I think we just need to approach this in the fact that we have to be hasty in what we do, and we have to find a broad brush approach to some level of that recruitment process.
Okay, thank you. And so, Director Octalien, again, one of the type of projects that what was clearly mentioned about disaster recovery. So I know on tap there are several, a lot of disaster recovery projects that's slated to be able to begin. So could you give us a little insight?
Sure. So when we're talking about construction, of course, we need masons, we need all of the construction disciplines, and we're looking at having architects, engineers, laborers. I mean, it's the full gamut of the construction industry, as well as the financial side. You're processing billions of dollars. We take that for granted, of people who've been able to have that kind of background to move that type of money through. We're also looking at data people, forensic accounting. We have accountants, but forensic accounting, because we're now looking at all the federal funds that we have that we're able to expend and being able to document very closely how we expend these dollars.
So that's looking at H1B and probably H2B based on the options that was just discussed.
Yes, and I was just very, very curious, and you mentioned the other Caribbean islands, because when we talk about the work that's coming, we try to look in our backyard first before we start to talk about Chile and everyone else that maybe haven't even heard about the Virgin Islands. And I was just very curious to understand, why are some on the list and why some are not on the list.
And that Director, Administrator Pasternak will tell you that it's tied to Homeland Security. And so it's a combination of different agencies that come together to make the Foreign Labor Certification Program. And so it starts with our local department, U.S. Department of Labor, Virgin Islands Department of Labor, and then we then are in touch with the U.S. Department of Labor, And a good example is the Department of Education in terms of how they utilize the foreign labor certification process. So that might help answer your question a little bit when we talk to education, and tell us about what you go through, what process do you go through to make a determination as to whether or not you need foreign labor?
So I will start, and then I would allow Director Jacobs to expound. But with the Department of Education is actually twofold. We are actually rebuilding. So the market for qualified, skilled tradesmen in order for us to complete our projects on the timelines that we have set is something that we have to work in conjunction and collaboration with the Office of Disaster Recovery, because that's going to impact the Department of Education as well. And historically, over the last, I would say over 10 years, we have been recruiting foreign teachers to come and work in our system because we are unable to recruit talent within the US or even locally. And if you study the trajectory, not many people are going into the field of education. And so we've had to do recruitment, aggressive recruitment in those foreign countries. But what we're seeing now is that many more states are taking advantage of that opportunity as well. So it boils down to who has the best offer. And what does the Department of Education in the Virgin Islands have to offer to an applicant who has options on where they can actually reside within the US territories and US mainland. And so that's part of what we're dealing with now. But in terms of the process, I'll allow Ms. Jacobs to speak on that.
So we've been using the H-1B visa from about 2007. So around that time, we heavily recruited in the Caribbean. So at one point, we were bringing folks from Dominica, Jamaica, Grenada, just strictly Caribbean, and a few touch points when it comes to the Philippines. We have folks from Russia, from every place. So we are a melting pot. We have a whole diverse, a high level of diversity when it comes to individuals that are working in the Department of Education. And so some of those individuals have actually retired. They've built their homes here, their kids went to UVI and are now working in our community as well. As of recently, we started to use the J1 visa. That is the teacher exchange. So it's a little bit different than the H1B, where the H1B has more portability, meaning an individual can get up today and decide that they are relocating somewhere else. The J1 visa, when we started about 2016, it's an application process that we have to apply for and get approved for every 2 years, and it's only to teachers. Whereas when we had the H1B, we could have hired librarians and counselors and so forth. With the J1, we are only able to hire teachers, meaning secondary, elementary, and that's it. One of the things is with the J1, it's a lot of extensive reporting where it's a cultural exchange program, and it requires these individuals to impart their culture, and when they leave, it's a mandatory 2-year stay, meaning that they have to go home to their home country and do 2 years before they could ever come back into the US. So when they leave here, they leave with our culture. I actually have some of them that left speaking like Crucians. Some of them have come back, some of them have gotten married here and so forth. So we now use the J1 in conjunction with the H1B because it is a lottery. And then with the J1, we have to apply for a certain number, and you have to bring them in within a few weeks of the school year. You can't bring them in after a certain time because those are some of the federal code regulations that we have to follow.
So we see that there's evidence that the foreign labor program has been in the Virgin Islands for some time, and so we've been utilizing it. So Director Hodge, could you tell us a little bit about what happens, how you're inundated by individuals from our community asking you to please help them find not only labor, but in particular, they're looking for foreign labor. Can you tell us a little bit about what the process entails.
Yes, definitely. We see like a larger number of employers now requesting the foreign labor cert, but what we're not seeing, and I know you spoke about it, about the different jobs opportunities that are out there because of the rebuild and all of that stuff, but we're not seeing that it's being posted. We're not seeing, for you to start a foreign labor certification, you definitely have to post your jobs. You have to post your jobs locally. And when you post your jobs, you definitely are doing recruitment throughout the entire United States. It's not, and territories. So we don't see that we're getting a lot of postings. So we are unsure if we have people here who could fill these positions, or people in the US that could fill the positions, because we're not seeing them posted. So you definitely have to post. Your application is not going to go anywhere any further without you showing that you had a posting with your local agency. And of course, recruitment. You see that it had a recruitment efforts. You have to show that. And that's basically it. You have to post, and we have to show that you had some kind of recruitment efforts. And of course, the Department of Labor is there to help you post your jobs and the recruitment.
And that job posting is tied to Act 5174, which every employer in the territory is expected to post their vacancies with the Virgin Islands Department of Labor. So the issue starts, everything starts with you posting your position.
So I do want to share in response to that comment, though, that a lot of this is driven when the contracts are let and the contracts are awarded. So these companies are not going to hire folks before they get the contract, but they can't wait until you can't wait until the contract is signed for them to be able to get started. So a lot of them have been having fairs. We've had 3 or 4 different contractors having fairs and just doing exploration on the ground. But we just need to make sure that we're ready once these contracts are executed, that they are actually, we're ready, and we have plans and approaches and strategies in place to ensure that these folks are available for these positions once we get started.
And that's a very good point, and that brings me back to Administrator Pasternak, because you hear the need, you know that there's a need for the program. We have been working with the U.S. Department of Labor on a regular basis. We've had our compliance summit, and we talked to employers last month about this particular option. But here is a scenario where the contractors cannot wait to be able to post their positions. Any recommendations?
Well, I think what we really need for them when they want to try to apply in the program, which typically starts about 4 or 5 months before they need the workers to start. So they need to try to provide to us some evidence that they are going to be awarded the contract, or have a letter of intent to receive the contract, so that we know that we're not certifying speculative employment. There is a bona fide work requirement in the program. So we're pretty flexible with businesses about this, and we understand the timing. But I think at some level, they're going to need to give us some kind of a signed commitment or agreement with an agency that they are actually bidding their final bid, or they're in the process of receiving a contract for services. That could help.
Yes. So step one, Charlene, what's step one?
Post your jobs.
Post your jobs.
So you cannot, you would not get, you would be rejected for a foreign, especially the H-2B, if you don't post locally and do some kind of recruitment efforts United States.
And so that posting is to make sure that there's nobody locally, as well as nobody on the United States that is interested in applying for that position.
Yes.
And so how long should a position be posted for?
I can help answer that one.
Yeah.
Yes, sure,
Yeah,
jump.
'cause
It's okay. Yeah, basically, a job is going to be posted initially for about maybe 15 to 17 calendar days before we get an initial recruitment report, seeing whether there's any qualified U.S. workers or workers on the island. And then we can issue a certification and the employer can keep moving through the process. But the job with the Virgin Islands Department of Labor will stay open until 21 days before the work start date. So it's a way to try to balance the need for employers to keep moving forward to obtain foreign workers while also making sure that domestic workers on the islands can still have access to those jobs. And there was a comment made about compliance and recruitment. And it's really true. It's very important to realize that when you're in H-2B, potentially also H-1B, there's some serious penalties for failing to consider and hire American workers that the Virgin Islands Department of Labor or any other worker who finds out about the job refers themselves. So like in H-1B, for example, you can be fined more than $2,300 for each violation. In H-2B, that fine is over $15,000 for each individual violation. So we take, recruiting and considering domestic workers for the jobs pretty seriously. And the last thing I'll mention before turning it back over to you is that there are situations where employers can employ domestic workers and foreign workers in the same job, even if American workers apply. It's all about whether the employer's got full-time employment for both sets of workers. Sometimes employers do. Sometimes they don't, but it's not necessarily the case because U.S. workers are referred and hired that H-2B workers have to be displaced and sent back home if the employer can offer full-time employment to both.
Let's talk about the fact that we have a great need. And so we are recommending at least 5 months before to start applying. Right, Brian?
Yes, sir.
Planning process, the posting is a must. So once they post and there's 17 days and it stays open for 21 days, what does the Department of Labor locally, what does the Virgin Islands Department of Labor do in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Labor once the position is filed?
Well, the employers actually file on the flag, the foreign labor application gateway. Locally, we don't do, after the posting and the recruitment, you now not finding candidates, you file your application on flag and then USDOL.
Okay, so USDOL, so step one, post. Step two, flag with, so there's a direct relationship between the employer or the business and the U.S. Department of Labor.
Yes, they do file for themselves. The businesses do file the application and flag themselves.
Okay.
No, I mean, I still think when we listen to the entire process almost requires deeper preparation than we are talking about. And I think that's when the Department of Labor, government to government, create the atmosphere or some sort of fair where you create a resource bank that these businesses, especially when you're talking about construction, right, that they can now tap into. So 6 months, it could be a year before, but you have this potential 50 candidates, or this potential 100 candidates from X, Y, or Z place, that somehow there is maybe a communication on ongoing, but at least they've already expressed their interest. You may have already done the things that's not financially prohibitive to them, so you already have that on file. And when you get into that situation, it makes it a whole lot easier to jump. But I think if we, especially in the context of everyone must be now approved individually. So you need a bank. And I think that's where government-to-government relationship really works, or department-to-department relationships. Create the bank and keep holding them.
The relationship is still going to be between that employer and the U.S. Department of
No,
Labor.
I know, I get that, but somehow I think even those employers, as in yourself, I mean, you're talking about general contractors, but somebody have to help them. And it is that protocol or that way of doing business, I think, that government to government could do, just to help create a pool. You need to apply, I get it.
And there are other companies, there are companies that are in the Virgin Islands, that's relocated to the Virgin Islands, and there are businesses locally that help with the recruitment process. And so the challenge that because I myself have had discussions with the Minister of Labor in Trinidad. I've had discussions with Guyana. I've had discussions with St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But the challenge is, it's not, the myth is that we can go and just simply ask them to come and work. They still have to go through this entire process, and it's a very formal process.
Absolutely.
So anything on disaster recovery?
Well, I mean, this is, all the points are well taken. It is a process, and there's a lot of stakeholders in this process. What we at the Office of Disaster Recovery has been looking at these many challenges, having these conversations with the contractors. First of all, is really for us to really get these larger contractors down here who, this is not their first rodeo in terms of constructing in difficult to develop areas. We are reaching out and recruiting and getting them interested in doing work here and utilizing some of those solutions that they've had in other areas where they had to import a workforce. And a lot of them are familiar with these programs, and just making sure that we are ready to provide them with whatever information, the relationships that we need to have with the federal agencies to ensure that the experience is a good one, and having them to be able to expand their footprint here in the Virgin Islands, because if we do this right, we're going to be in this for at least 10 years. And if things don't go exactly how we want, then we'll be here for a minute.
And just remember, this program is a temporary program. It's not intended to be permanent. And so as the labor market data changes, that's why there's different checkpoints. As we're talking about the low unemployment rate now, just like we're looking at certain industries that have, for example, right now in our VIYA system, accommodations and food, there are about 571 job orders. So right now, there's a lot of jobs that are available in accommodation and food industry. Also, there are about 114 job offers that I saw there when I took a peek for construction. So the job orders are there. We just need to make sure that your positions have to be posted. And if you're thinking about having an opportunity about bringing in foreign labor, you definitely have to go through this process. So it's something that needs to be thought out long and hard before you go there. Again, it's temporary. And Administrator Pasternak, the responsibility of those individuals, they're subject to all the local labor laws. So they can't come and you pay a different wage. So there are prevailing wages that needs to be filed. So you need to file whatever the wage is for that particular position. So you're responsible for their living conditions. So you might have to be responsible for them being transported to the Virgin Islands. So it is an extensive cost that you need to start taking a look at. And so the Department of Labor is here to be able to help in every way we can. Director Geraldine Hodge is our point person in the Virgin Islands. The Director of Workforce Development Services, that would be the local entry point. Then we would connect with Administrator Pasternak at the U.S. Department of Labor to help with the process. We work very well together, and I call him Brian. Brian promises that if we send an application, we're going to get it processed. And how quickly, Brian?
Yeah, depending upon when you file, that's going to be the key. Yep, when you need the workers is absolutely essential.
Different filing periods. But again,
yes.
So there's a filing period in July, Brian, and then a filing period in April and October.
There's July and January tend to be heavy filing months. So depending upon when you need workers, it's very important to understand who else is trying to access this program. This program is very oversubscribed, but the other key beyond timing is the labor supply. So as I mentioned before, like strategically, there are specific set-aside visas for certain countries that some of those caps have not been reached, even despite all the demand. So if you're interested in Haiti or Guatemala or any of those other countries that I mentioned where there are specific set-asides, you could actually access the program, even though the demand for it's very large right now.
Set-asides with no caps.
Say that again?
Specific set-asides with no caps outside of the 66,000 cap.
Everything is to be, we all have caps of some sort. Yeah.
Okay. So again, I think I'm hoping that we've been able to answer some questions about foreign labor. Had a great panel. We got to see that is a definite need for us to explore this, especially with all the disaster recovery projects coming on top. There's also a need for us to look at it for other industries, not only in construction. We also see that there's evidence of the program being utilized in the Virgin Islands right now through the Department of Education. And again, Department of Labor is here to assist. I want to take the opportunity to thank you. It's been a very, very great panel. Brian, thank you for being here again from the U.S. Department of Labor. We wish that you were here in person, but thank you for your cooperation. And again, thank you all.
Thank you.